Hello and welcome to Krachtwerken. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a tutorial about all the things you can do to enhance your MIDI drum tracks, EZDrummer, slate drums, purchased, created, programmed drums. And the reason I want to do this is I think most people know a lot of these things I'm going to show you, but I think the reason that I have for putting this up is to try and explain that you can actually do a hell of a lot with them and make them sound quite dynamic, quite authentic, and make them your own to a huge degree. And obviously the reason is because there's all this bitching and moaning about, not having had a real drummer and, it's just a, drum loop, drum track and all that kind of nonsense. Excuse, people are having a good time mowing the lawn here by the sound of things. So essentially, there's a lot of complaints about using drum tracks, EZDrummer, MIDI drums, programmed drums. One, you didn't have somebody play them, so you lose the human element. You're not playing with somebody in the room and you get that whole band thing going, that gelling of bassist and guitarist and drummer. It's not your drums, it's somebody else's drums that have been recorded. It's usually somebody else's has played it. The roboticness of it, that it's quite to the grid, that there is not a lot of dynamics in the sense of how the song flows and how the drums are being played. So there's all these things that as a programmed drums loses out to against a real drummer, especially a good real drummer. Now, I'm not here to say that that's not true, because I completely agree. There's nothing better than to have a real drummer. But what I do want to do is stop people from being scared of using programmed drums, and more importantly, to just be satisfied with just the basic, here's my programmed drums, that'll do, let's get on with it. Because there's so much that can be done to the drum loops, the MIDI files, how you record and mix these drums to make them your own, to make them more authentic, to make them dynamic, to make them not sound like a robotic drum machine. There's a hell of a lot of things you can do. So first things first, EZDrummer, Addictive Drums, slate drums, all these are really good. They have recorded the samples top high quality, more than anybody at home could probably do. So the actual files themselves, the actual drum hits are really good. Okay, there's no doubt about that. And they sound correct, they sound right. The snares, everything, the rides, everything sounds the way it should sound. It is in the playback that they fail, in this robotic kind of playback, and that is always the same sample that plays in succession. So that's one thing that can be solved. The next thing is that you didn't employ the time, the effort, the money to go and hire a studio or a drummer or all that goes with recording real drums. And to be fair, we know what the reason people use is they just don't have it, okay? And me personally, I feel that making music is more important than to say, I can't do it because. So you should always try and get a good result, no matter what you've got to your disposal. Another thing that fails in this, is kind of mentioned before, is the fact that if I have a drum roll or anything like that, what tends to happen is that if you don't manipulate certain things, you're literally playing the same sample at exactly the same velocity, at exactly the same time in the bars, and that is where the roboticness comes from. Again, something that can be fixed. Then there is also the way that the overall sound of the drum kit sounds, no matter how good the samples are, because there is, to a degree, I would suggest, not enough ability to really do a proper drum mix within the drum sampling, EZDrummer, whatever you want to call it. So again, that can be fixed, that can be solved. A lot of things can be done. The other thing is that if you use an electronic drum kit, a good one that really picks up the different nuances of where you hit on the pad, if you have got your hi-hat open or close halfway and all these kind of things, they actually pick this up. So if you actually have somebody playing drum kit, electronic drum kit, you actually have a drummer playing it like electronic drum kit. So all you're missing out on then is that last bit where you physically haven't yourself recorded that hit on your drum. Some of these things, I have to admit, are not really the biggest deal in my personal opinion. So all of these things can be solved up to the point where you have not recorded the original sample. Which brings a philosophical question to mind. If you use an electronic drum kit and you manipulate all these things as I would suggest, and you do all these things, and you go into a studio and you record your own samples, and you then apply them to your EZDrummer, did you then do everything yourself? I don't know. I guess that's philosophical. That's where's the line. Anyway, so the point of this little video is to show you all the things that you can do to your mix, to your actually playing, how you record, the idea behind how you set up your drums, which loops you choose, how you then play over it, how you then change them to suit your song, how you manipulate the MIDI files, the velocities, how you make sure that it doesn't play back exactly the same sample all the time, that there's dynamics within your playing, not just within the loudness and the hits, but also how the drums can follow your song, and how you as the programmer have control over making that fit and actually using that power to actually create a really good drum track which suits your song, to such a degree that really the only thing that you haven't done is physically recorded that drum hit of your own drums in your own studio, your own way, and obviously you have not necessarily played the drums yourself, or you had the drummer play it, you had somebody else play it. So essentially chipping away all the things that are against using EZDrummer. I'm just saying EZDrummer, I mean any of these. Chipping away as many of them that you really get to as authentic as possible, and also understand that you can, with the power that you have going in afterwards to manipulate things, that you can really get into a position where you are actively making it work for you and your song, which is the ultimate aim. You know, you're going to tell a drummer to do X, Y, and Z as well to suit the song or the riff or the piece. So essentially you could argue that you have some control over that. Now obviously this has got nothing to do with rather doing this than having a drummer. This is absolutely not the case. This is a case of people like me, many people are in that situation where they literally just don't have a drummer or the place. And now with quarantine, you're sitting there maybe a year without being able to do things properly in a room and work on things. And that's where something like this can actually yield a really good result. And I would also argue a final result. It doesn't just have to be for songwriting or whatever. The other thing that people have to remember is that you don't know what kind of music people make. There's a place for different pieces of software in different genres, metal, stone, all these kind of things. Yeah, I probably want a real drummer. But if I listen to the gent shit, right? Now, this is another thing. People are going to get mad at me, right? But if you really listen to modern metal that's been recorded, now forget about the fact that everything has been put to the grid afterwards. Even if they didn't, the overworking of every single drum makes the drum sound so perfect that you sometimes can hardly distinguish between was it EZDrummer or was it a real drummer, because the drummer is so perfect. Every item was so heavily compressed and manipulated. So everything is so perfect, and the snare hits all sound the same because they've all got exactly the same compression and EQ curves and everything. And the drummer hit it at exactly the same spot. So it's like, it starts sounding monotonous as well. But I think that's actually a problem of the genre and not of music. It has to do with the gent stuff and some of the metal stuff now, where everything has to be peaked. So you don't get the dynamics even if it was manually recorded. And obviously there's a couple of YouTubers who will constantly go on about using real drums. And no matter how good their Glenn Fricker, your drum recording sounds, they sound so good to a degree that they sound robotic as well, and it sounds like the same hits. Now that's actually kudos to how good you are at doing your craft. But like I said, I think that has a lot to do with the genre rather than where everything has to be maxed, everything has to be hard. And it's like every time you hear the fattest drum ever, the most gnarly snare sound, if everything is fat, hard, and the best, then it all is the same at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things you can do to try and get some dynamics in, because that's really what music is all about. Changing in dynamics, changing in volumes, changing in speeds, changing in flow. And so there you go. That is my 2 pence. Sorry for the long wishwash. Off to the tutorial. So to get this started, what we've got here is a very simple track. We have got some EZDrummer, the top. We've got guitar left, guitar right, out of an aux, and we have a bass track and just running amplitude. This is just the Randall amp in amplitude with its basic cab, and I'll give you an idea of what this sounds like as is. So this whole idea is to show you what we can do to drum tracks in order to make them sound a little bit more natural. All the things we have mentioned before is reasons why you wouldn't want to use drum samplers, EZDrummer, etc. But if you're forced to, there is no reason why you can't make it sound as good and as natural a performance as possible. So the way I usually like to do it is when I'm writing a wee track, I'll do something like this. Very basic, get the drum tracks down. I know roughly what riffs I want to use. I play them over. I do like a basic recording. But then I can go back in and say, okay, where am I accentuating? Where are the little accents in the song, in the riff, etc.? And then I can go back into the drums and actually manipulate certain things. So there's a lot of things that we've done here. First of all, I'm using EZDrummer. Just going to start with EZDrummer. And what happens here is that we take EZDrummer, find a nice patch. I usually go for either the modern vintage or the prog rock one, and I just leave it at that. So let's do that again. I'll put it on the prog rock, get everything set to normal. Okay, so then I find the drum loops that I like. Now, I really think it's worthwhile purchasing these. Or you play them on an electronic drum kit and record your own MIDI, because at least that will bring out your own playing. It might not bring out your own recorded drum set, but it'll bring out at least your own playing. So the reason I like to purchase ones is because they're played by really good drummers. And they do have certain nuances of a player in them. They're not perfectly aligned, all that kind of stuff. Plus, you've got an actual person drumming these little bits. So what I've done in this, I've literally just put in a few MIDI loops together. Very basic, not going overboard. Just want to show you a few things. So if I go into these loops, you can see the hits right here. Now, this is the first thing, just as an FYI. So you can hear that you actually have slightly different hits on, for example, the snare. So remember what this is all about. This is all about trying to get the roboticness out of using MIDI drums. It's all about getting that kind of machine gun sameness out of the bass drum and the snare. It's about the rides and all the things not sounding too mechanical and but more natural and flowing. So actually these EZDrummer, Addictive Drums, most of these have a lot of stuff built in to try and make this more natural feeling to start with. For example, they allow you to humanize things. Even the MIDI editing mode, you can actually humanize the whole thing, which essentially is just taking all the little hits and slightly manipulating them, moving them a little bit forward or backward in time, slightly varying their velocity hits. And that's important because actually when you take a MIDI kit like this, a MIDI recorded piece like this, and EZDrummer, the samples that it plays back, it actually plays back the samples to the volume. So it doesn't take one sample and play it louder or softer. It has different samples for different degrees of hits. So how hard the drummer hit them has got different samples, because a snare drum sounds quite different from being hit like just lightly to medium to really loud. So it does have a lot of things built in that actually tries to help you to make it sound a little bit more natural. Now, if you put everything into your MIDI timeline and everything is 127, it always plays back exactly the same sample, or if they're all exactly the same volume, you don't have that varying degree. Now, as we get on with this tutorial, there are other things you can do to make it sound even more fluid and more natural, but these are kind of some of the main things, is to not have every hit exactly the same volume. So if you look at these little ones at the bottom, this is the velocity. So the different spikes obviously mean different velocities in volume. So for example, let's take a snare. So there's quite a different sound, but also I can have rim shots, middle shots. You hear that? They are different. So I can put these in succession, so I don't always have to have the snare always on this line here. I can have one here, one here, one here. So when I play through it, they sound different. It sounds more natural, so you don't have that tuck 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 robotic kind of beating of the snare. So there's, even just in the kind of basic editing, you've got a lot of things to help you make it not such a undynamic playback of the drum kit. So that's one thing, to go in and actually edit where the hit lies. I don't know if there was one or not. Okay, so that's one thing. You can go in. First thing to do is, actually, I'm jumping around a bit because I didn't prepare myself, but let's start at the beginning. So getting the drums to sound a bit more natural is all about following the song. So a drummer has got a purpose of setting the rhythm, but a drummer can also do a lot of other things. He can play quite musically. Where does he put in the fills? Where does he accentuate, and how hard does he hit certain drums at certain point, not just in the song but also in the riff, not just in the build up but also in a lead bit, you know, to build things up, to bring things back down, all these kind of things. And he does that by how hard he plays, by how he might drag a beat, how he might fill things up or leave it empty. How hard he hits the different cymbals, which ones he hits. So there's a lot of things that they can do to not just play, you know, the rhythm of the song, but actually to keep, to make the whole song flow with the drums. So you have everything at your disposal between a good drum VST like EZDrummer. I'm not promoting EZDrummer because that's just the one I've kind of defaulted to, but there's also the SSD5 from Slate. There's also Addictive Drums, and I think Toontracks, and there's a few others that you can use. Kind of defaulted to EZDrummer because I ended up buying it, and so I'm using it quite often. But I'll show you that I'm actually going to use it in conjunction with something else as well. So anyway, first things first, we want to analyze our song. So we go and we play it back with just the rough draft, basic drums. So here we have just a basic kind of melodic riff with a beat behind it. And then we have a bow to get to the next part, like a bridge, verse, whatever. Bow. Hear that? Listen to the rhythm. Now, this is the kind of thing, this is the obvious one. I just quickly came up with a riff and choose some loops that fit out of the purchased one. I think they were all out of the Doomcore one from EZDrummer, from Toontracks. But between these, I kind of found most of the loops that I wanted to find. So anyway, so you can find the ones that suit your song, suit the riff, suit the lead. Paste it in, put them together, and there you go. But I wanted to show you like an obvious glaring issue right here. So here we have okay, so we have that kind of accentuation there, and if we want to make it more natural, we can drag not this one, but there's like a hit just before, right, or after, so we can have that lag. So let's try one piece. We'll take the snap off so we can move it, and then we'll move this one a bit further as well. So what happens now, theoretically, we'll see if it works, is that you've got this bit early hit on time and drag before the next one. Okay, so we can do all these things and it's still in time, and this is where people confuse putting things to the grid and out of time. To the grid doesn't mean on time, and to the grid means literally locking every single hit and every single nuance exactly to a specific time. But just because a drummer who doesn't play to the grid doesn't mean he plays out of time. It just means he doesn't lock every single note and every single hit into exactly the same position at a specific amount of milliseconds later. And that's what makes it robotic. Doesn't mean it's not in time. So for example, little drags and little waits like this help a song flow and keep that human element in the song. So, for example, this is a good place to do it. You can hear that little drag that we've created. And we're not out of time, we're still in time. Now, what I usually do is I do a quick, rough drum guide, do the guitar, what I want to do. And then when I see little things like that, I will fix it up. And then I'll go back and play the guitar to be in time with that, because obviously the rhythm should, the bass, the guitar, the bass and the drums should really dictate the rhythm, not the guitar. So I will then go back and re-record, if I have to, the guitar to make it suit. Sometimes your playing of the guitar or the bass kind of leads into what the drum might actually have to be moved around a bit. So that's one good example of where you can use literally manually go in and actually think like a drummer, think about the song, and change your dynamics of the rhythm and the hits. Another thing, as you can see here, you've got the snare always at max. Now, because this is quite a heavy part, you can get away with it, but nothing stops you from slightly varying the hit and also the position of these to be slightly different, to have slightly different snare hits, so the drummer doesn't hit the snare exactly the same way every time. Okay, same with the bass drum. There's some low ones in here. Sometimes you have to like pick them all up to like cut through the mix, depending on what you're doing. But in certain parts, you want them to flow dynamically. It's not going to be that same heavy punch every single time. The one thing that is really annoying and starts sounding like a drum machine is rides, and not rides specifically, but hi-hats. And one of the reasons is, again, this. So if I play back this piece, it's not too bad because we've got these in between, but just change the volume slightly randomly, and again thinking about the song, and I'll show you what I mean. So like this one here, because it's got that, naturally you imagine that the drummer might hit this one harder, so we can pick that one, the ones on the bass drum that coincides with the bass hit, and see what that sounds like. See that? Immediately the dynamic changes and sounds more natural. Alright, you've got that driving. See what I mean? And that didn't happen because see, if the drummers are recording these MIDI files, they're just playing the beats. They don't have a song and a riff behind them. They are playing these beats, they get processed, boom, MIDI'd, and away they go. So they might be wonderfully played by a human drummer, but they are not played to a piece of music that they listen to. I can only imagine that. So I can go back in and I can change these dynamics within the file and bring those dynamics out for the song, the riff, the tune that we're playing. This already, it sounds a lot better. I think that works already well. So I'm not going to change everything. So what I usually do first though is I go into Edit, Humanize, and I do this for everything. I let the automatically change the hits, the timing, and the velocity of all the hits, so that they're just not entirely specifically perfectly on the timeline every time. So they kind of move around a bit. Okay, you can see that here. I do that with every single one of these. So I do a lot of work on going... What's up, Josh? I do a lot of work going into every single one of these and actually making sure that the hits are just slightly different, that there are accents on the snare, on the rides, on whatever, where maybe I've got a ride going, and there are certain accents in the riff to accentuate. I would then go and put it a little higher, others lower. So I actually do a lot of work trying to think like what the drummer would be playing over this, using somebody else's. By the end of it, you've actually changed a lot. You've changed the velocity, you've changed the dynamics of the playing through the actual velocity of the hits, and maybe even slightly adjust the timing to compensate for what you're trying to do. So actually this purchased beat from somebody else that everybody complains about you using for your song, you actually personalize. Now, you still haven't played it, you still haven't recorded your own drum kit, but at least you have personalized it to achieve the best for your song, for the dynamics, for what you're trying to achieve with that song. And that's really what music is all about. It's about taking people on a ride, guiding them through your melodies, your rhythms. And nothing stops you in these editors to achieve that. It just takes some time and effort. The other thing that I've noticed is that the overheads, or let me put it this way, all the cymbals are always a little bit too loud. Now, at first concentrate on actually getting your dynamics of the playing right, like we've shown you now. And only then would I start mixing the drums in the drum tracker, so I'm just gonna let this go in a loop. So now we can start thinking about what's my song sound like, what kind of snare sound do I want, what kind of bass drum sound do I want, etc., etc. So we start with something like the prog rock or the vintage, because this is kind of the music I'm going for. If you're playing AC/DC stuff, you can go like basic or like an old. They usually have nice presets from where to start from, and in EZDrummer the presets actually sound really good. They sound really good, but once they get into the mix, they kind of disappear a bit, because you have to do quite a bit to get the drums sounding good in the mix as an overall kit, and I think it fails a little bit. I might not do it in this tutorial, but I sometimes split the MIDI files in such a way that all my drums are in one and all my overheads, so all the cymbals, are in another MIDI file, playing back together. But it means that I can compress and manipulate my cymbals different from the actual drum kit on the drum bus, which helps a lot, because if you compress the whole kit together, you get lots of little anomalies happening, which anybody who knows about recording and mixing drums will know what I'm talking about. You compress a bit too much here, and you know, the whole sound flakes out every time the drum kick hits, and etc., etc. So you can try and avoid that. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you what I tend to do to get a much fuller sound out of the drum kit. Firstly, here is the snare sound. It's fine. I'm actually going to keep that. That is the default here, yeah. See what the bass drum sounds like. Got a nice attack. It's not bad. But this is one thing I now do standard. I'm going to take the toms, and I'm going to choose the top one for a reason. You'll see why in a second. Right, so I've chosen all the top ones. I need to kind of make a note of which kick I'm using, okay? Then I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to use all the top ones for a reason, which will be explained very quickly. There's two ways of doing this. So now I know I've got two top sets, okay? I'm going to the mixer. The bass drum's pretty loud. The reverb is a bit too much for my liking. And I can now mix the overheads in the way I like. Okay, that's cool. Let's do that separately, actually. Okay, now I'm gonna duplicate this track. Now I'm not looking for metal sound in here where everything has to be really tight and closed up. What I'm doing now will probably not work so well for that. So I'm gonna go back to EZDrummer, and I'm gonna choose the modern vintage for a reason. Gonna mute this one. It's got a much different sound. Again, the bass drum is quite kind of low, not low, but kind of like a lower tune. The ambience is too high. There's some compression on it, which is fine. Too much reverb. And I'm gonna just balance out the overheads. Now I'm gonna go back into the drum set, and I'm gonna choose the second one. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to play the two tracks together. And if we have the same ones, you get like a really awful kind of phasing issues. So I'm going to use a slightly different lower the rhythm pitch. I like it. Okay, so now I've got 2 drum tracks and I'm going to play them together. So as you can hear, a much fuller sound, and I can now mix each one separately and then blend these two together. That is also why I took the overhead down a bit, the ambience down a bit, and the reverb down, because you're going to have 2 reverbs together. I don't like the snare sound. Okay, so sometimes I also do this, believe me or not. And I actually use 2 completely different, that this might actually hang. All right. So we're using 2 on top of one another, depending on the sound that you're after. Go into the mixer. I really like the sound of this slate set. What I don't like about it is it doesn't sound good in a mix, in my opinion, and that's why I don't use it by itself. It's got a nice room sound. So now I can again actually mix the 2 together. So as you can see, you can get to really nice different tones that way, and you can make it your own. What I mean by make it your own is that by using different samples, by manipulating your MIDI files, by blending 2 drum kits together, and remember now I'm just blending the whole 2 drum kits together. You can actually separate out certain things if you want, so you can only have the ride from one and, you know, this from the other one, whatever. You can still split up the in fact, how long have we been recording? 24 minutes. Got 5 minutes. What we'll do is we'll quickly show you how to actually split up the drums from the actual overheads, so all the cymbals and stuff, and so that you can actually compress them differently. Let's do that quickly. Basically what I'm trying to show is that there's a million ways to skin a cat. You don't have to have bland drums just because you don't have a drummer or you're not able to record drums. So let's quickly show you another way from a mixing point of view. This is not to try and get to a more dynamic sound with your drums by manipulating MIDI files and stuff like that. This is more about, you know, trying to get the mix a little bit more glued in. Usually, basically, like I said, they sound great. They really sound good if you just play them back and using their own mixers and stuff. But what I've noticed is that when it comes to the mix, it's really hard to make the whole mix gel without compromising some of the sounds of the bass and the overheads. It just doesn't gel right, and the reason is you need to compress a few drums themselves separately, like the bass and the snare, and actually work on them. You've got to treat your room differently to how you treat your overheads, etc., and then you've got to mix them in a mix bus together with a different kind of compression once again. And I think that's where they're lacking a bit, is you need to control all those elements. You can't just take an overall drum kit and just compress it in a certain way and everything will be fine. And EZDrummer, in my opinion, does not have enough control over each drum, the room and the overheads to make it fit in every scenario. Addictive Drums has got a much better mixer interface, and you can really change every single one of the tracks and drums and compress them and everything you need to do. So you get a much better result out of that. But the sound of Addictive Drums, I think now is a bit dated. So anyway, so what we're going to do is let's just take the top one. Let's take the main one we were working on. And what I want to do is separate out at the very least all the overheads, so all the cymbals from the rest of the drum kit. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. A very quick way of doing it is to just duplicate it. Let's call this one EZDrummer drums, all overheads. Okay, so the easiest way to do it is you go into this. We're going to play back both at the same time, and we're going to mute kick, snare, toms, and everything else. So we're also going to mute the reverb, so any effects that they put onto it. Okay, so when it plays back, where am I on the first one? Huh? Yeah. So what we're now hearing is we're not hearing, you can hear the snare, the kick and everything else, obviously, because the overheads pick that up, but it's the localized close mics that are now off. So just like in a normal recording environment, all you're getting now is the overhead mics, not the room, not anything else, just the overheads. And so I can now, by having the two tracks playing over on top of one another, I now have the ability to apply whatever effects on this track only. So obviously the same goes for the rest. So now I go back in and I switch the overheads off. Okay, I can keep everything the same because I can still go, I can literally make 5-6 tracks where one is only for the kick, is enabled, one's only the snare, and then you can go into basically that kind of scenario where you have recorded everything separately and you're manipulating everything separately with in your DAW with VSTs as you wish, with the drum bus and all that. So you can expand this process for as far as you want. You can even take the room out and just manipulate the room. In this case, I'm just showing you taking off the overheads, well, the cymbals and the overheads, and separating them out from the rest. So in this one, I'm just taking the overheads out. And the reason is I don't want them playing. So if I now play the kit, these two, okay. So as you can hear, I've just got the main ones, but I still have the room sounds of those. So now we go back to having both in. And now I can actually do what you tend to do with overheads, which is, let's just use these. Let's compress them. We'll compress them hard. I'm just gonna use like so I'm compressing the overheads quite hard, but separately completely from the rest of the drum kit. And what I can also do is apply kind of typical EQ curve for them. That's the typical EQ curve I don't like using. I like getting rid of the lows altogether. Now, with them separated out, I also have a lot more control of my level of the overheads and the cymbals. Okay, so now the last thing we can do is, which you should always do, is actually aux them. Now we can apply a good bass kind of compression. So this was just a quick run through. I think you can see where this is going. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you don't have the ability, the facility, the place, the knowledge to record proper drums, it doesn't mean they have to sound like shit. There's a lot of things that you can do using your head, thinking about your song, about the type of music, about your mix that you can do to make them sound. This is not necessarily trying to make them sound as realistic as possible. It is using all these elements to try and make sure that you understand that you can actually get a really musical, naturally dynamic feeling drum sound, as well as playing that suits your song. It might actually teach you something about drumming as well, to understand your drummer if you ever get one. So that is the main things I wanted to show. I think there's a lot that can be done, and you shouldn't shy away. because a bunch of people tell you can only use real drummers and then think you can't get a decent drum track for your song. You can manipulate your time signatures, you can manipulate your velocities, the sound, the dynamics. You can make it sound as if you've got a normal drum kit playing. So all the arguments against using drum tracks and EZDrummer and the likes, you can chip away at a lot of those reasons, up to the point where you're only sitting with the last reason, which is you haven't recorded the drum kit yourself. You didn't have a real player playing on that specific moment in time. But all the other things about being dynamic, being not sore on the ear, not being robotic, all these things can be cured, essentially. So you're really just left down to, so from an authenticity point of view, you shrink all those arguments down to just a few, and you can actually get a half decent recording done. But here's the other thing that I might have mentioned, because I'm actually recording this thing before the first part. The main objective when it comes to writing music is the end result. Does it sound good? Does it relate to people? Is it authentic? So what I mean by that is that you create it, that you produce and create and mold every item of it to suit the song and the message that you're trying to convey, the thing that you're trying to tell people. As long as you achieve that, I think you're absolutely fine. There's no doubt that everybody would rather have a really great drummer who's got a really great drum kit, and you've got a really great studio, and you've got all the time in the world, and you can do all that. But we all know that's not possible. So if everybody sits online and bitches and moans about not having recorded a proper drummer, don't make that think that you should not be trying to produce something as best as possible, even if you've got to use it, even if that has to be your final product. Because you really can, by using all these little elements, you can really get to a good sounding drum track, authentic sounding drum track, and more importantly, a drum track that suits and enhances your riff, for example. So anyway, that is it from me. Thank you very much.